everybody. I'm Everett, and I'm the scriptwriter for this project.
I'm Jackson, and I am the producer and director of this project.
My name is Rio, and I am the person recording/editing.
My name is Jonah, and I'm a secondary researcher of the project.
For this project, we will be doing a Minecraft report about climate change. It is kind of random and all over the place, but I feel like it's a pretty cool idea. If you don't agree with what we're saying, you might want to rethink your choices, as all of our information is backed up by evidence. We will be covering the long history of climate change, starting at a time when the Industrial Revolution wasn't even a thought. That's about it for the intro. Without further ado, let's get this show on the road.
People may believe that before the Industrial Revolution, climate change wasn't a thing, but this is simply not the truth. I think most people know that the leading factor for climate change is the large amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. A greenhouse gas is a gas that is in Earth's atmosphere and easily traps heat. A lot of the greenhouse gases are in our atmosphere today are because of mass industrialization, but greenhouse gases in general were in the atmosphere before industrialization began. According to an article released by Columbia University in September of 2019, there were still other things that were causing greenhouse gases to be released into the atmosphere before the revolution. These things include deforestation. Deforestation has been going on for a long time, as wood is an extremely important resource for building things like housing, but this mass deforestation that is needed to get this wood is not worth it. Plants like trees eat up carbon dioxide in the process of photosynthesis, and when there are less trees, there are less things eating up that carbon dioxide. Having less things eating up the carbon dioxide means more of it is going into the atmosphere. This information shows that climate change was still happening pre-industrialization, but the same research shows that the rate at which Earth was warming was 2 times slower than it was after industrialization.
This just puts into perspective how many things contribute to this huge issue of climate change. Let's try and shift the focus to a more positive note. Let's talk about glaciers. The vast majority of glaciers exist in the polar regions. Something so special about them is their ability to reflect the sun's heat back up into space. They act almost exactly like sea ice. The biggest difference between the two is the noticeable difference in where they exist. Sea ice forms on top of the ocean whilst glaciers form on land. It is basically a suit of armor that protects the Earth from being an incredibly warm, absorbent ball in space. But, as we've gone throughout history, the amount of glaciers has reduced. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution alone, there were already large amounts of toxic metals in the ice. Research shows that there were toxic metals like cadmium and chromium that date back all the way to 1870. But this was not really affecting the amount and size of glaciers back then. Nearly all glaciers remained unchanged.
Throughout this talk so far, we have mentioned something called industrialization, or the Industrial Revolution. This part of our talk is precisely about that topic. The Industrial Revolution was one of the biggest events in human history, as it was the Big Bang of climate change. Prior to this era, most goods were created by hand, which was a time-consuming and labor-intensive process. However, with the invention of machinery, everything changed. Suddenly, it was possible to produce goods on a much larger scale and at a faster rate. This increased efficiency led to a significant increase in productivity, which in turn had a profound impact on society as a whole. One of the biggest impacts of this new age of industrialization was the newfound largely spread use of carbon dioxide emissions. Many of the inventions that revolutionized the way modern items were produced relied on the burning of mass fossil fuels. Even though there were all of these risks that came with the Industrial Revolution, it still carried on. Since then, the rate at which the Earth is warming has increased by 50% since 1780, the start of the Industrial Revolution. It goes without saying at this point that the Industrial Revolution was a huge success, as it brought great innovation and progress, but it seems as though the downsides of it kind of even it out, and make it feel not like much progress has been accomplished. The amount of carbon that this Industrial Revolution has caused to be released really makes us feel like it's not worth it. The climate has been destroyed just to have things be produced faster and more efficiently. It's really up to you to decide whether that is a worthy trade, but in my opinion, it is not.
Cars are an everyday way of transportation. You probably use one to get to school. Some people use energy-consuming vehicles, but a vast majority of the cars on our road are gasoline-powered. The knowledge of gas consumption being hazardous was discovered not too long in the early 1900s. According to Martin V. Milazzi from Michigan State University, the automobile industry became the world's largest manufacturing concern. By 1990, around 630 million motor vehicles were all over the globe. While this was a great step for transportation, this was playing the lead role for the warming of our climates. Cars let off carbon dioxide by burning fossil fuels. These fuels are deep underground and require us to drill to find them. As more carbon dioxide is released to the atmosphere, the planet gets warmer and warmer. Cars are one of the more talked about topics when it comes to climate change, and it's pretty reasonable. They burn the largest amount of fossil fuels and pollute our planet. We are basically just our own poison. We still use these intoxicating vehicles that are killing us and can hardly even try to take a moment and stop. Look, I'm not saying I don't get driven to school in a gas guzzler every day, but you know what I mean. In all, cars are a huge contributor to climate change, and if something isn't done about it, we will all die sooner than intended.
There are many things that actively contribute to making climate change worse, and we've already talked about a few of them. One of the biggest unspoken ones is the military. Wars and military endeavors are one of the largest contributors to destroying our environment. Aside from the mass bombings that destroy everything, there are still so many things that make this earth worse to live in. According to Joe McCarthy of Global Citizen, war can cause erosion, deforestation, and pollution. Also, wars can cause climate change by releasing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, as they burn a lot of fossil fuels to power their vehicles and machinery, which also destroys the environment because of the huge number of vehicles that they use. Land habitats aren't the only things being affected by military and war. Water habitats are being heavily affected as well. These marine habitats are increasingly damaged as the military has more and more warships in the sea. Roughly 6% of greenhouse gas emissions from the world come from the U.S. military alone. Even if the U.S. military was an entire huge country, 6% of the world's emissions would still be a lot. This ranks the military 47th in the world in emissions, which is insane. And the biggest issue about this is that nobody talks about how much the military hurts the environment.
A lot of the things that we've talked about so far are what humans are doing to cause climate change. But this is going to be talking about what animals like livestock do to affect the climate. According to Amy Quinton of UC Davis, cows are the leading greenhouse gas emitter out of all agricultural endeavors. Cows produce nearly 15% of all greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. You may wonder how they are emitting all of these greenhouse gases, and it's purely through their monstrous burps. One cow alone burps 220 pounds of methane each year. Now, methane gas may not last as long in the atmosphere as CO2, but it is 28 times stronger than CO2 at warming up the atmosphere. One of the ways scientists are trying to remove the amount of methane cows produce is by changing up their diet to have 1% of it be seaweed. This has shown that it works, but there is simply nowhere near enough seaweed to be harvested while still keeping the oceans healthy. This has also caused them to research ways to mass harvest seaweed.
A lot of these causes we have talked about so far are very small scale, and they are all very tightly concentrated into one area. One huge source of climate change is something that may be overlooked. This source is something we all live in, and something that is vital to all of our lives. Cities. In today's world, it has become increasingly difficult to find a suburban area that is situated at least an hour away from a city. While cities offer significant benefits, they also contribute enormously to the emission of greenhouse gases, thereby causing considerable harm to the environment. In fact, the energy-related greenhouse gas emissions attributed to cities amount to a staggering 70% of overall emissions worldwide. Metropolitan areas have a notorious reputation for being harmful to the planet, not just because of the high carbon emissions from vehicles like cars, but also due to certain edifices in the urban environment still relying on non-renewable energy sources to power their operations. A feasible solution to tackle this issue lies in adopting a reliable and sustainable energy source. However, the current state of research in this field suggests that this might not become a reality anytime soon, and only remains a distant ambition.
Well, let's get back to the glaciers. As we talked about, glaciers are the suit of armor that reflects the heat from the sun back into space. As our skyrocketing climate crisis rises, the more melty the polar areas will begin to get. Around this time, we talked about glaciers in the beginning, and the toll of evasions and other sources causing climate change were not nearly high enough to begin melting them. With our situation now, that's a whole different story. All the wildlife in nature on these glaciers will die. And it may not be too far from now. Animals such as polar bears are being driven to extinction with all the weight we have thrown on their shoulders. As our coat of armor deteriorates, so do we. The planet is becoming weak and is warming at a far more enhanced rate than necessary. If the heat can't escape the planet, it will stay in our atmosphere, which, if you don't know, it's already happening. It'll be far more severe. I know we keep yakking and yakking and yakking and yakking about how the world is a threat, but this is going to be a huge problem. Insert polar bear dying.
Cities also aren't only causing climate change, they're also heavily affected by it. Most large cities are very close to the ocean and oftentimes are near sea level. As temperatures on Earth rise, glaciers continue to melt, and as the glaciers melt, the more displaced water there is. This displaced water causes sea levels to rise, and over time it will put things at or near sea level underwater. Cities are at their own poison, and they add on to climate change and later get affected by it. What happens to each place depends on where you are, whether it's a different continent, country, or even state, which could include, as we've already mentioned, flooding. Because beyond that, however, it will be more difficult to maintain a basic lifestyle. Livestock and fresh water will be more of a challenge to access, while other places may even suffer the biggest drought ever. Though these effects may only happen in select areas, it is still a terrifying reality that might as well come to be.
We have talked quite a bit about greenhouse gases, even the effects of them. I'm going to go over a lot of those effects right now, even some we may not have mentioned. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, effects such as the Earth getting warmer, ice melting in polar regions, and the rising of sea levels is a big part of what will happen if we don't take action. Those aren't the only things that could happen, though. The Earth could also suffer the acidification of our oceans, increased chances of natural disasters, and just the overall threat of everything on the planet. It will be more difficult to find clean water and even have reliable food sources. The more carbon dioxide that is trapped, the more likely it is for this to be our harsh reality. Whilst our northern areas are expected to get more wet, the southern areas will become more dry. Hurricanes and other events like that will be easier to come across, and they will most likely be at way higher levels than usual, such as a level 4 to 5 hurricane. Snow may be replaced with rain a majority of the time. Cold season storms will be pushed northward and will be way stronger and powerful. Perhaps we will live to see the effects. Maybe we won't. Only time will tell, I guess. Can you play your part in helping our global crisis? There are many things you could do, and none of them are very inconvenient. Most of the things are alternatives to taking a car as transport. You could do things like ride a bike to school or work, choose to walk instead of driving, or if you can take public transport to get somewhere not an easy biking distance. Any of these things are helpful. Anything along those lines could help out, even if it's just in the slightest. It may seem like you, one small person on this 8 billion person Earth, may do nothing. That is simply not the case. One person becomes two, two becomes four, and shortly the entire world is more sustainable with millions choosing alternative transportation. Of course, we can't tell you what to do. Ride in that car if you want. Who's stopping you? Just know it is a huge help to everyone if you do. This statement has been going around for as long as people have even considered climate change a threat. But no amount of convincing ever seems to sway many people's opinions. This just shows how ridiculously difficult it is to try and convey this point. I hope that this presentation has somewhat given you an idea on what climate change really is, and how important it is to stop it. People always say that they agree with it and will do something about it, but most of the times they do something once and shortly give up as it is too inconvenient for them. Everyone likes to take action in their own way, and I hope this video can help you find your way of taking action. I don't blame anyone for not doing anything. It's tough to force yourself to do it. We just hope that this video will show you an extra reason to do something.